Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ILN Talk Show, a free space to discuss different developments in Muslim majority countries and beyond in the hope of promoting a Muslim case for freedom. This is actually our 9th episode, and it is a very special one because my guest today is a very special one. His name is Ali Salman, the CEO of the Islam and Liberty Network. Mr. Ali, we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Tasnim. It's a pleasure to be a guest today at the ILN Talk Show.
Thank you. So today we're not going to be talking about our organization, the Islamic Liberty Network. We're going to be talking about something very special, which is Ali's book, this one. It's called Islam and Economics, a primer on markets, morality, and justice. It is published by the Acton Institute in 2021. So we're going to be discussing this book thoroughly today, and I want to start by something very particular, which is the fact that you are an expert in economics, someone who wrote so many articles, took part in several conferences, and participated in several panels on economy. When did you take the decision to write your own book, particularly on Islam and economy? Did you spot any lack or maybe a deficiency in the field that you wanted to address yourself?
Well, Tasneem, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about this book. I think this, as everything else, it has been a journey. I wrote published a monograph about 7 or 8 years ago, which was on price control in Islam. That monograph was later condensed into like smaller articles and published in a couple of magazines. I think it was read by a few people. Eventually, it got the attention of actually our friend Mustafa Akyol from and he was advising the Acton Institute Islamic Outreach Program, and he read my article. So we met in Kuala Lumpur, but that was in 2017. And then he asked if I would be happy to write a fuller introduction or about the ideas of economic organization as introduced by in earlier Islamic history and as espoused in Qur'an and Sunnah. And with a lot of humbleness, I accepted that offer, and I said, well, it'll be a great honor for me to write something like that, primarily for an audience in the US and in the West, but of course, by extension, for anyone who is interested in learning more about the subject of economics from an Islamic history point of view. And one of the things which I think Mustafa and also leadership at Acton Institute highlighted, that people in the West, in US, when they read about Islamic history or when they read about the Prophet of Islam, then they don't get to know this aspect of Prophet personality or this aspect of the ideas of an Islamic principles. And so maybe by highlighting some of these issues and how maybe the Islamic principles addresses the issue of economics, of distribution, of property rights, maybe we can actually start a new debate on the subject. So I think these were the few motivations which actually really led me to reconnect with my earlier work, which was specifically on price control, but then expand really on more on the holistic side. And in this journey, I have been assisted by so many friends, scholars who are much better scholars in Islamic history than myself, that I have immensely benefited from all those experiences and feedback.
Great, perfect. So let's focus on the title for a second, because it's the first thing that any person who's interested in reading this book would see. So the book deals obviously with several aspects of the relationship between Islam and economics, and the title should preferably reflect this. How did you eventually settle on this title in particular? I mean, does the word primer in the title suggest that this book is specifically targeted for those beginners who need someone to pave the way for them to understand the link between Islam and economics?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I think first of all, this is an introductory text. So I have tried to keep a language simple and as accessible as it can be. But also the issue of economics cannot be isolated from the larger issue of justice, of morality, and that is really, if you go back to the foundations of even classical economic thought, going, let's say in our modern era, going back to Adam Smith, who wrote about moral sentiments first before he wrote The Wealth of Nations. And so I wanted to sort of create that link between the moral principles of Islam and the economic principles of Islam, while keeping, while considering the fact that since Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, himself had led a very active life of an entrepreneur, of a trader. So we actually can step forward. Like it's we're not just talking about moral aspect, but we're also talking about the functional aspect of economic organization or society. So there are moral foundations, but then there are actual, practical sort of guidelines on what needs to be done, and then what needs to be avoided. And in the light of that, I think this link between morality and economics and justice is created. And let me, also, I think maybe one part of your first question I could not answer properly when you talked about a deficiency. We always think about the contribution which hopefully our academic work can make in the immense existing literature on Islamic economics. By the way, I don't use the word Islamic economics directly, because that is also, in my view, is a bit problematic, which tends to talk about Islamization of everything. So I take a different view on that. But I think the deficiency which Professor Farid Alatas from Malaysia, actually is a great scholar. When he read my earlier work, I must mention, because he was probably the first one who said that, Ali, you're talking about a rediscovery of classical aspects of economic organization, which is different from what modern subject of Islamic economics would like to teach us. Yeah. So this is something else. This is like you're trying to rediscover how economics was conceptualized in the Islamic society and how it was practiced. So it is different from the modern subject of Islamic economics. And I said, really, wow, this is interesting. I did not look at it from that point of view. Yeah. And I think that is where I got some motivation. Okay, if this work can somehow be placed in the literature and maybe considered as a, in value addition in that respect, then I should take it forward.
Great. Okay, so you're definitely adding something to academia. So before delving into the crux and the heart and the many chapters of the book, I wanted to ask you about the different responses that you received from the book. And let me start by quoting Mr. Hussein Askari, who is Prof of Business and International Affairs at the University of George Washington University. He actually commented on your book by saying that, quote, "This excellent book will have importance for years to come and will be an invaluable companion to any serious course in Islamic economics and Islamic thought," end of quote. So this clearly means that the response to your book was very positive, and that your book is going to be implemented in economy courses at several top universities, like at least the George Washington University. Could you tell us more about how the book was received in the world of academia and even by beginners who would be interested in this topic?
Thank you, Tasnim. I think I'm humbled by the words which Professor Hussain Askari used about my book, and I really hope that it can be considered that useful. To be honest, because it is just a beginning, since my book came out about 6 months ago, I have received invitations to speak in universities, and there has been some interest by various academic circles. And I'm still, learning the response which I have been receiving. Um, but I think also, and I'm speaking specifically now from a Pakistani perspective or Pakistani experience so far. Uh, for many readers or for many in the audience, the conclusions of this book may come as a surprise, and may actually challenge, and they actually do in some respect, the understanding of Islamic economics as a modern discipline. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure how the established academic world, especially in countries where this subject is already introduced, is going to receive it um, more positively or more pessimistically. I'm just learning it as we speak.
So I wanted to go back before I go to my next question. I want to go back for a minute for to what you said earlier when you said that you're against using the word Islamic economics because you're against Islamization of everything. So can you please clarify that point again? Why you're against using that term?
So the process, as as many scholars later call refer as Islamization, is based on an idea that all the social sciences, all the physical or natural sciences need to be Islamicized. That everything has to go back to basics of Islamic knowledge, which is first Qur'an and Sunnah, and then we can sort of contribute in the knowledge, and then that is applicable to economics, but also sociology, but also chemistry, also biology, so everything. So I take an exception to this understanding of Islamization, and I believe that the process of knowledge accumulation according to our spirit and according to the Islamic teaching, as the way I understand, is very universal, is very
Mm-hmm.
pluralistic, and actually our Prophet, peace be upon him, encouraged us to seek knowledge, even if we have to go to China, in his words, and that the wisdom is something which all believers should strive to get. So one needs to be more open-minded. I think that is my criticism on the subject matter itself.
Mm-hmm.
Having said so, I still take the view that there are specific guidelines which the practice of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his companions provide us when we talk about economic organization. But it does not mean to negate the achievements of the subject of economics itself, and it does not require us to rewrite the textbook of economics at all. That is where
Okay.
I'm going today.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, that's very clear. Okay, let's jump on the book right now. So the book is obviously divided into a number of chapters and sub-chapters. In the beginning, you chose to clarify some principles like the principle of ownership, wealth creation, and wealth circulation. Then you cover the different institutional tenets of the Islamic economic framework like market regulations and law of inheritance. And finally, you chose to discuss this question: Islamic economic framework, historical romance, or practical prescription. Could you tell us why you opted for this specific plan and take us through some of its most important points?
Sure. So I think first of all, for any concept, you have to have to explain the sort of principles and the main conceptual or theoretical underpinnings of any
Mm-hmm.
framework. So the first part is naturally trying to do that. when I talk about principle of ownership, principle of wealth creation, and principle of wealth circulation, in my understanding, I'm giving an outline of principles. And this is one of the things which I have realized while reading the literature on Islamic economics, that it is very heavy on the distributive justice. It is very heavy on the importance of wealth circulation, which is indeed important, but it is not talking a lot about wealth creation. How can you distribute wealth if you can't create first?
Yeah.
And what are the principles which needs to be respected for wealth creation? And there I introduced the idea of property rights. But property rights, then I classify into private property rights and the public property rights. And I do recognize that this conception of property rights is not exactly similar to, let's say, the idea of private property rights in the mainstream economic literature. There are some differences, if you like, and we can talk about it. But so first is the principles, but then I think the challenge for me and for anyone who is dealing with the subject is that, all right, these principles are great. What next? How do we implement?
Yeah.
What are the policies? What are the tools are you recommending? And whether the tools and policies you are recommending are indeed derived from the sources of Islam itself, or is it something else? So there I make another attempt and identify these 8 sort of institution tenets of this framework, which I believe most of them, if not all of them, can find the link and inspiration directly from the earlier sources, the classical sources of knowledge in Islam itself. Talking about price control and why price controls are prohibited in Islam, and what problems can it lead to. There's a very, very rich literature in the fiqh itself, which talks about, which takes this hadith when Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam prohibited price control when
Yeah.
companions complained to him, and then takes it and provides different interpretations, which you read, you will be surprised. And I've provided some quotes that how deeply they are explaining the economic consequences of price control, as if we are reading a modern textbook. And then things like tax policy. Okay, what is the tax policy? Is there a tax policy? Is zakat a tax or a poor due? Is zakat what is, so I take zakat as a tax, as a transaction, something on which is not is yes, there are of course share for the poor, but also it has a larger meaning for provision of resources for running the government. And then there are other sources of wealth distribution, such as waqf, sadaqat, and inheritance. All these institutions are established, and then we are practiced in the early Islamic history. We also see that market regulations are extremely important. And then I have described some of the market regulations which were introduced by Prophet Muhammad himself.
Yeah.
That at one point we talk about price liberalization, but on the other hand, we have to talk about the exploitation, and information asymmetry, which may occur because some the misuse of resources or misuse of information which a trader or a market participant may have. And there are specific injunctions which we find in Islamic history, can be quoted and can be placed in this context. So I think there are these aspects of the institutional tenets I have talked about, and that's the idea behind this framework
The
of the book.
plan. Yeah. Great. Okay, so moving from the plan itself, there are many quotes, some very important quotes in the book by prominent people in the world of economics. One in particular caught my attention. It's by Bendrik Kohler from his book Early Islam and the Birth of Capitalism. It reads as Muhammad gave his community, along with a new religion framework for its economy. Muhammad's economic policy promoted entrepreneurial initiative, efficient distribution of resources, and wealth creation, a framework for creating wealth that lasted for centuries. End of quote. So many people around the world, including Muslims themselves, fail to understand that Islam is not just a religion with a set of rules, but actually an entire way of life that includes an economic vision as well as with all of its economic regulations and values. Is that what you aim to show in your book?
It's not an easy question to answer. My first answer would be yes. I'm talking about the principles of economic organization as derived from the Islamic sources, as you put it, the Islamic way of life.
Yeah.
But then I also state in my introduction that look, when it comes to religion, it matters. The message matters, but also the interpretation of that message matters. So one needs to be open enough to understand different interpretations when it comes to religion, and Islam is no exception to it. And while I say that the framework itself is comprehensive enough, but then it may not have answers to all the problems which we face in the economic realm today. And we definitely should avoid looking into the text always to find the specific answers. I think what I'm saying is that there are principles, there are guidelines which are available, but then a lot of specifics have been left to the particular context and particular society. And I'm not saying that this is the truth, or this is the only way one should interpret the economic organization of an Islamic society.
Absolutely. So it depends on the society and time and context and everything. So still with this previous quote, Kohler stated that the Islamic framework for creating wealth lasted for centuries. But as we all know, this kind of stopped, and the majority of Muslim countries today are sinking into poverty, debt, and economic stagnation. What do you think happened? A lot of people find it easy to explain this crisis by blaming it all on, decades of colonialism and the ongoing economic dependency on the West. But is it the case? Didn't this happen because we kind of strayed away from the Islamic economic framework that our ancestors followed for centuries and thrived because of it?
I think there is no single answer to it, and of course, when we talk about the understanding of our own history, there can't be and should not be. To begin with, actually, I would mention Timur Quran, who is foremost authority on the subject of economic history, particularly in the Islamic context. And he takes a very different view. Actually, he believes that the lack of evolution of certain institutions such as Waqf in the Islamic civilization was actually a contributor to the decline of Muslim society. And while an institution might have served a particular need in a particular time, this should have been evolved. There are other views about it, alternative views, and that actually the Muslim societies were able to evolve and change the rules. For instance, with the evolution of modern banking system about 300 or 400 years ago, there was a degree of acceptance. Today we talk about Islamic banking a lot in a very sort of Puritan sense, but it wasn't the case in our history. Benedict Kohler mentions that the interest was being practiced in the Muslim societies also in different forms. And I briefly mentioned the episode of formation of Muslim banks in different parts of the Muslim world during the Ottoman Empire, in India, in Egypt, much before and much earlier than today's Islamic bank, as they like call themselves. So this shows that the Muslim society was trying to evolve with the time, with the passage of time, and the poverty, which you have rightly identified, and other economic problems, may not be totally ascribed or attributed to the lack of evolution in the Muslim society itself. It has taken its own form. Yes, there were other, I would say, institutional factors. Colonization is definitely a part of the problem. I would not say that that did not affect us as badly. It did. For instance, the institution of Waqf I mentioned, which played, according to my understanding, an important role in the socio-economic development of Muslim societies, was taken over by the colonial powers, and then it was nationalized, and then it
Not
still
even by
has.
the colonial powers. I mean, in Tunisia, the president himself stopped it. So without much
Yeah,
intervention, from
yeah,
the
that's right. Yeah,
economic powers.
so
Good.
after the independence of these nation states, then the state continued to control it. So I think that's a part of the problem, but also I think the fact that that we could not make the progress in the same speed as, let's say, the other nations were. If I can bring our friend Ahmed Kuru here, and he talks about this alliance between ulama and state as a problem, and the fact that it sort of creates an obstacle in the freedom of thought. Let's say freedom of thought by economists, by sociologists, by scientists, that all can be stopped by an overbearing state, which, according to his thesis, has contributed significantly to decline in Muslim societies. I think that all these factors, these are internal factors, nothing to do with the colonial power. But then I think we have to address the damage done by the occupation, taking over our assets and people by the external forces. But if you talk today, I mean, today means, let's say, last 70 or 80 years, formally the independence is there, right?
Yes.
So these countries, if you talk now in our current context, these countries have sovereignty over their economies, but the issues of poverty persist.
Yes.
And issues of so there's something else now. We can't keep on looking back, and we can't keep on
Absolutely. Yeah.
looking and blame others, but we need to see, okay, what are the things we are doing wrong now, and let's say, positively speaking, which countries are performing relatively better, Muslim countries, and what they have done to achieve it, right? So I remember a couple of years ago when I was in Tunisia, we talked about the examples from Malaysia and Turkey.
Yes.
And although Turkey is in deep crisis right now, but at that point in time, we thought that, okay, at least these two countries are providing better economic prospects for their citizens.
Yeah.
Also, many Gulf countries, I think, in terms of at least the economic sense, they are definitely providing better environments. So we see these good examples, but you're right that by and large, we can still see economic crisis and poverty in most of the Muslim majority countries.
Okay, just as you mentioned, Ahmed Kuru had he was our guest in the ILN Talk Show before. For those who want to check that episode, they're welcome. I'm promoting my own, show. Anyway, so back to the Islamic banking. I'm actually interested in knowing what do you think exactly about the Islamic banking, because you only mentioned it and didn't seem to like the naming. And it is really unfathomable that several Muslim countries forbid it while it is already thriving and perfectly implemented in many Western countries. So how can we explain this?
Yes, this is interesting, and this is the subject which has received the most attention by Islamic economists around the world. Partly because there are incentives attached to it, and if you are associated with an Islamic bank, if today I'm appointed as an advisor to an Islamic bank, I'll be making a lot of money.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reason it is thriving in so many countries. Um, but my own perspective is this, that look, the way interest rates are determined today, and the role of inflation and the role of monetary policy is not properly understood by our classical, I would say, let me correct myself, by a modern Islamic economist.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to reject interest and tend to take interest in the same sense of in the sense that Quran prohibits riba. So there's a big debate between interest and riba, whether each interest is riba or not, which is very clear that if it is riba, which is an exploitative function in the economy, then of course it is forbidden. There can't be two opinions about it. But my humble opinion is that over centuries, large part of this function of the economy, the function of interest, has evolved. One doesn't have to equate it with exploitation in the sense it was used in earlier time periods. It still exists in Pakistan, in many countries, in many other countries of the world. Um, Actually, in rural areas, the money lenders charge very high level of interest rate, especially from the poor people who
Okay.
need smaller amounts of loan, and they get the loans at a very high rate of return even today. So maybe that is riba, but maybe
Yeah.
banking interest is not riba. So that's the view I'm taking, and this is something which I'm still understanding. But I think before me, scholars like Dr. Fazlur Rahman have taken a very clear view about this distinction, and I tend to maintain that distinction. And therefore, I say that look, the problem of Islamic banking is an implicit one. When they say
Mm-hmm.
that we are Islamic, they are implying that the other banks are non-Islamic, and then when they are saying we are halal, they are saying others are haram, right?
Yeah.
So that is the implication, and that's a problem. I think that's the problem. That's my problem with Islamic banks. And
Mm-hmm.
if I accept interest as an important function of the allocation of resources, then I'm happier with the conventional banks today, who can facilitate a transaction if I get one onto mortgage for a house or get a car, for instance. My personal preference, if you ask me, would
Yeah.
be a conventional bank. At least they are not saying, they're not making any claim, and I know the costs. And if you talk about practice, unfortunately, many Islamic banks are charging and have hidden costs, and sometimes some of them maybe using just names, just terms to convince themselves and others that look, this is better. But in essence, I don't see the difference. I think the essential difference between the cash price and the credit price is still admitted. And so if it is that, I think we should just embrace the fact that the economy has moved on, and we need to look into uh, aspects of exploitation. Really, that is something we must target, and we
Mm-hmm.
must offer alternatives through sadaqat, for instance, through interest-free lending, especially for the poor people who do not have means to actually return the money
Yeah.
with additional income. So that's something we need to look into, and that's definitely an important social issue.
I think we have to have another island talk show specifically for this topic in particular. Okay. Back to the book. I think one of your strategies throughout the book is that you use several Quranic verses and prophetic sayings on economy to illustrate your points. One of them in particular caught my attention because of something I'm gonna mention in a minute. So the saying goes as follows: Water, fire, and grass belong to community. This is a saying by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And many people use it to suggest that Islam is encouraging a socialist approach, whereas all of us know that this is not the case, because Islam is rather for an entrepreneurial approach, not exactly a capitalistic one, but definitely not a socialist one. How can we address this misconception?
I'm glad that you have asked this, and I'm glad that you have differentiated between possibly between entrepreneurial system and capitalist system. And I agree with you that this may be a misconception. And that is something which I have addressed in the first section or the first chapter of my book, in which I have differentiated between the private property rights and public property rights. And I've outlined that there are aspects of resources, especially natural resources, which are not created as a result of human effort. For instance, water, human beings did not create it, right? Or grass, or all the natural resources, the the oil, for instance, we didn't create it. So there has to be some kind of common claim. Details can be worked out, and this has been worked out already by many economists. There has to be some common claim of society for equitable distribution, but also looking ahead for the future generations. And having said that, the aspect where we recognize the importance of entrepreneurial system is the fact that, okay, the water is there, but the delivery of water may not be free. You are sitting in your house and enjoying safe drinking water is definitely has some costs, and the water itself is a small part of that cost. The whole idea of the logistics, the distribution, the pipelines, the cleaning process, the transportation, the packaging process involves cost, and those aspects of I think system they have to base on incentive, they have to base on a price, and there we need to bring back the idea of private property rights. So the assets which we create, the houses which we build, the factories which we establish are all private property, and the state cannot take them over. Whereas there are natural resources. So I see there are public goods, and I don't see this necessarily as a leading towards a socialistic system of economy, which because in socialism, what is happening is you take away all the incentives for production,
Yeah.
And there's a central authority which is then distributing the resources.
Absolutely. So we don't have to be a literalist. We have to, analyze more and differentiate between what you just said, the costs and the product itself, which can be for free, but it's, the procedures that are attached to it can cost, and that's why it becomes private. Okay, so it's already 40 minutes. Can you believe that? And I'm led to ask my last question. When will we see your next book, and what will it be about?
Okay, so the challenge is now for me that already I'm receiving some suggestions. I have received one particular suggestion to work on the empirical aspects of these ideas. So, for
Okay.
instance, I'm in talks with a former governor of a central bank, who, like me, believes that okay, there is a potential of zakat as a tax policy, but the big question mark is that can it be sufficient? The conventional opinion is that it cannot be sufficient. It cannot fulfill the need of modern state at all. So how can we actually prepare a modern code of zakat-inspired taxation? The principles are clear. It is low rate. It is flat in nature. It doesn't discriminate from sector to sectors. But then there's a lot of work needed actually in the issue of zakat itself.
Yeah.
And I think the social protection is another important area. So more on the empirical side, I hope that I am able to work further ahead in collaboration with others who are there, who are working in this field, and I hope to contribute more in that in the future.
Absolutely. So once that book is out, you're welcome to have another Island Talk Show on it. And meanwhile, we're going to attach the link for those who want to purchase the book and order it online in the description. And with this, I want to thank you again for being my guest today and looking forward to having more talk shows with you.
Thank you so much, Tasneem. I really enjoyed this conversation.
You're welcome. I'm sure that our viewers are going to benefit just like I benefited from this fascinating discussion. See you next time and goodbye.